It is that time of year. We are all thinking about the best books that we read in 2025. And so hello and welcome to another video, part 1 of 2 for my best books of 2025. Today we are discussing the best non-fiction books that I read this year. Before we get into the books, if you are a non-fiction fan or you would like to read more non-fiction, then I have good news for you. I just launched my 2026 non-fiction reading challenge. It's the latest video that I uploaded before this one. It's on my Instagram, on my blog. Join us if you want to read more non-fiction next year. I have 5 books, actually I have 6 books, I have an honorary mention, which I'll talk about at the end. I have 5 books on my main list to talk to you about, and they're in no particular order. These are the books that stayed with me, and also books that sort of changed how I saw things in the world. Books that I really felt have enlightened me and opened my eyes to a sort of whole other way of seeing things. So that was my sort of criteria for my best non-fiction books. The first one I'm going to talk about is Who's Afraid of Gender by Judith Butler. And now Judith Butler is not the only author on this list where I came across them at university. I enjoyed what I read of their writing at the time, and have not read any since. And I decided it was time for that to change. This is a very recent release. I think it's their most recent release. And it is about transphobia and trans rights and feminism and how all those things are linked together. Each chapter looks at a different sort of flavour, I guess, of transphobia. So there's discussion on the sort of Catholic Church's approach. There's discussion on the American kind of approach to transphobia. There's discussion on the British Turf Island approach, and all the lovely flavours, and why they're all bad, obviously, but how they all came to be in those, how they grew out of those specific societies and environments, and pointing out the flaws, pulling apart the arguments, and especially pulling apart any and all argument that transphobia is anything to do with feminism, because they are obviously opposed to each other ideologically. I'm sure if you're watching this and if you read this book, you would agree with me. So I will calm down on that soapbox. But it is an excellent book. A little bit dense, does take a while to get through. Although basically every paragraph is a mic drop moment. I would sort of keep turning to my now wife and be like, I've got to read you this sentence. I've got to read you this section. It is just so well put together. All the arguments are so well put across. They take a very intersectional approach as well. They look at how transphobia is linked with colonialism and racism and the sort of wider history of Western culture. It's a really excellent book. And it's really good. It's just really good. It's really good. And now for something completely different. The next one on my list is Raising Hair by Chloe Dalton. This is a memoir about a woman who, during COVID, took in an abandoned baby hare that she found and nursed it back to health, doing everything she thought she could to kind of keep it wild and not treat it as a pet. And throughout the course of the book, then she and the hare do build a kind of bond, and the hare starts to think of her home as its home, or the other hare, we do find out, is a girl. She has babies, and it's all about the kind of getting close with nature and appreciating nature in another way. And I think especially when all of this happened over lockdown, then that's something I think many of us kind of relate to. I certainly have a renewed love for the outdoors and for nature since lockdown, and it was just a really sort of beautiful and moving memoir. It was very self-reflective and self-critical. She wasn't afraid to sort of say, if I could do things again, I'd do them differently. This is what I should and shouldn't have done. When it comes to sort of interfering isn't the right word, but just interacting with nature in that way. And also her love and passion for this subject really came across. She talks about the way that hares have been seen in literature and in culture and folklore, It was just a really lovely, lovely book. I listened to the audiobook. It was narrated by, I cannot remember her name. I can picture her. She played Molly in Sherlock, and I cannot remember her name, but she narrated the book and she did an excellent job. And I really enjoyed it. It was lovely. Really, really nice book. Carrying on with the nature theme, and actually 3 out of the 5 of these books I read because they were on the shortlist for the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction. So, I mean, it's no surprise that I enjoyed them because that's why I read them. They were on a shortlist for a prize. But we're carrying on with nature. Where the Wild Sea Can Be by Helen Scales, which is an excellent name if you're writing a book about fish. Did I say where the wild sea can be? What the wild sea can be. I love the ocean. I always have my whole life. If you'd asked me when I was like 7 years old, what do you want to be when you're older? I would have told you a marine biologist. And honestly, the only reason that stopped being the number one goal is I found out you would have to dissect things on the way to becoming a marine biologist. And I was like, nah, no thank you. This book specifically looks at how humanity has shaped the oceans, how the ecosystems of the world's oceans have shifted due to human activity, how, or if that can be reversed, what the ethical questions around that are, what the consequences of some attempts at reversing sort of human effects have been, the political side of things. So it is mostly about nature and the sort of creatures of the sea and these ecosystems. It is also about the human effect on those things as well. And just, yeah, again, beautifully written, really kind of moving and effectively written. And you just get a sense of the love that she has for the oceans and for the creatures in it. Everything was described so sort of evocatively isn't quite the right word. I usually use that word for fiction. I use it for fiction quite a lot. But I really felt like I was getting up close and personal with a lot of these creatures. But also, yeah, just like proving how terrible an influence we as a species have been. She balances it perfectly of here is sort of the devastation that has been caused, but here is something we can do to fix it. Hello. Sorry, the dog just woke up. It's always a really nice balance of the two, which is so important when you have a topic such as this one. And then something completely different again is Straight Acting by Will Tosh. This is about Shakespeare and queerness and where those things meet. Some of it is about sort of queerness in Shakespeare's work. Mostly it's about how what we think of today as queerness was a part of daily life in Elizabethan times. How the relationships Shakespeare had and the experiences he had would have been perceived as being unusual in the time or not, and how that relates to our modern day sense of queerness. I really appreciated how this book didn't try to be a sort of argument as to why Shakespeare's gay, why Shakespeare's bi, etc. I mean, clearly he's not straight, but instead putting Shakespeare in his own context and looking at the things that he or his friends had censored, at the materials that were available to them, at the environment that they grew up in and what relationships were expected to be like in that time. And so it was a really sort of fascinating and eye-opening read. And I always enjoy any book that just reminds us not only that queer people have always been here, but that queerness as a thing that is in opposition to heteronormativity. For some reason I couldn't remember that word when I started it. That those two things are fairly new inventions. And that's always a nice thing to remember. The last one on my sort of regular list is another one from the Women's Prize shortlist, and that is The Story of a Heart by Rachel Clark. And I did not expect to enjoy this one as much as I did. It was really fantastic, and it sort of took one moment in time, one event, and explored all the things around that event. And when it's done well, I really enjoy that approach to a non-fiction novel. It's about a heart transplant that happened between two children in the UK several years ago now, and it's about everything that surrounded that one moment. So it's about the donor and her family and what happened to her family sort of in what they were like before she tragically died, and how they coped with their grief and made the decision that she should be a donor. It's about the recipient and his health journey and his family life and what his life was like before he received the transplant. It's about the transplant surgeon and the nurses and everyone who sort of works, about the transplant team, of which there are shockingly few in the country. I did not know. And the history of transplant surgery, the history of children's hospitals, so many different things that come from this one event, and explored them all with such care and nuance, without ever sort of... It was emotional without indulging in emotion. You know, it didn't shy away from the fact that these are very emotional and charged topics, but it didn't indulge in that. It didn't feel like the goal was to make us emotional. It was, really perfectly crafted, incredibly well sort of told, the whole story. And it was just really, really good. And I said I had an honorary mention, and the reason it's an honorary mention is I haven't actually finished it yet, and that is Orientalism by Edward W. Said. And again, this is one I have read a lot of it, just not in order. This was a frequently assigned text as a sort of further reading text when I was an undergraduate, for a lot of my ethnomusicology classes. And I've always meant to read the whole thing, and I came across a copy a couple of years ago in a secondhand bookshop, and I was like, it's a sign, there it is, and I'm finally reading it, but I'm not very far through. I read the first chapter, but I have read some of the other chapters in years gone by, and it's brilliant. It's a truly, truly excellent book, which I don't think is really any surprise. It's a very sort of well-known and well-established piece of non-fiction writing that kind of, again, bridges that gap, kind of like quite a few of the books on this list, bridges that gap between sort of popular non-fiction and academic non-fiction, and sits nicely in that in-between, although it's more on the academic side, I would say. If you're unfamiliar with the book, it is about the concept of Orientalism, basically. Everything about it, tracing its origins, how it manifests in what was modern day. It was written in the 70s. The foreword in my edition was from the 25th anniversary edition, so that was from the early 2000s, which reflected a lot of the changing views on the Middle East, especially from a Western perspective. A lot of the book is spent debunking a lot of these terms as well, and kind of just really examining the us versus them mindset of Europe, and to a certain extent America as well, and the part of the world that we refer to as the Middle East. So that's my honorary mention, because even though I haven't finished it, I think it is going to be one of the best non-fiction books I read this year. At the time of filming, I've got 2 weeks left. It is slow going, it is quite dense, but I reckon I can do it. I can do it, it's going to be great. So those are the best non-fiction books that I read in 2025. Let me know what the best non-fiction books you read were, because I will be needing some recommendations for next year's non-fiction challenge. If you read any of the books that I read as well, then let me know what you thought. And I will see you in the next video when we talk about my best fiction books of the year. Ta-ra for now.